Good afternoon, Emile. We're back again so soon.
Yes.
So we'd had a conversation a couple of hours ago, and since that time, just a couple more thoughts have been coming to us. This is sort of a part two to the conversation.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that you talked about was that you'd been tested for autism, and there was some
Yes.
very interesting range of findings, a range of marks that you got. I don't know if marks is the correct scores. Can you take us inside that a little bit?
Well, yeah, essentially, when I got that, like the results back from all the tests and everything, it was a very clear indication and also like a very, like from a source that I consider trustworthy.
Hmm.
Um, and, and it was displaying essentially like very, very high strengths, as I mentioned, like strengths in like metacognition
Yeah.
and some other aspects as well that I can't think off of the top of my head, but I could go fetch if necessary. But and like some very low scores elsewhere, like for example like initiative functionality, like starting projects, starting tasks, and things. And that's not just in a work aspect either. It's like just simple things, just like convincing myself to go take a shower sometimes can be problematic because um it's like a amount of time it's a problem in my routine in a way, or like in my habits. It's like I have to stop what I'm doing to go do that because well we have to, as well as some other very low scores like empathy, for example, as I had mentioned, where that doesn't mean that I'm like apathetic completely. It's like I'm not emotionless. It just means that in situations where some people might like experience and like feel these emotions much more. So, for example, sometimes students when they fail an exam, for example, like I have some friends that like you get affected emotionally by that, and like I have friends, mostly female friends, but also masculine friends that like will often cry about many things and like cry multiple times a week, and that's where I'm different, and that's where I scored low, is that I tend to stay very neutral in everything I do, which
Oh,
has good sides. It allows me to like have reasonable, well, more a more neutral reasonable thinking when trying to fix problems. But also there's also just the whole emotional connectivity with others, for example, that is very much lacking, where it seems like to others it seems like I don't care, or that I don't understand what they're going through, which is not entirely true, because even though I scored low on empathy, that doesn't mean I don't I can't display sympathy, which is different.
um, I think you mentioned, or Lucy, your mum mentioned that about a year ago you were quite a low point. Something had,
Yes,
is that true?
absolutely.
And it was a year ago. What had happened? Why was that happening then? What was the trigger?
Well, essentially it was just like the culmination of this long process of trying without, or like trying and working without really understanding what I was doing, and like or knowing who I was really. So in college, as I mentioned previously, like a lot of stuff, a lot of the tasks and a lot of the expectations that were, well, expected from me, or like the things that were expected from me, started to get very difficult because I didn't know how to do it, or like it wasn't really favorable to me to do it in the way that was presented. Um, so essentially, like at first, my first few semesters went pretty well. I had good grades, as I did in high school. But as time went on, like it was difficult to keep it up. It was difficult to justify keeping it up as well. For example, like myself, I was studying jazz piano in post-secondary studies, and first semester went very well. Second semester, I failed one class, and then third semester, with the combination later, I should note that I'm messing up the elements here, but I ended up failing and failing more and more classes as time went on, and essentially what ended up at that process kept happening and getting worse as time went on up until last year. So I abandoned post-secondary studies a total of 3 times. The first time I was just taking a break, partly because I felt like just generally I needed to, but also I had hurt myself practicing in my right arm, so I was actually asked to stop practicing, so I had to stop. Came back, and I came back in the same exact thing, and now that I think about it, I don't know why I did in a way, because I tried to go back without changing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, like, I don't know why I expected different, but once again, I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. So, and didn't end up working either, especially because that was early 2020, which happened to also be the early start of COVID, and the big impact it had on studies in general. And then I went back again, and that the third time I didn't go back in music. I went back in programming to try something different. So that was the first like attempt I did, but it was very hard for me to do that decision because my entire life, especially since I started playing piano when I was 5, my entire life, whenever people would ask me, like, "Who are you?" like what do I identify as, or like what represents me?
Yeah.
Always the pianist. I was always the musician, and now like I couldn't identify to that anymore, because once again, that was a perspective that was given to me
Mm-hmm.
and that I didn't question or that I didn't agree with. But yeah, all that led to last year, where I had abandoned studies in programming again. I had tried to work in another province, didn't work out either. I tried to work in different places, and I tried just taking time off. It didn't work. Like nothing was working. So that's where like all the more introspective and questioning started really occurring. But during those very lows, like to go back to the initial question, now that we have the entire context, uh,
Okay.
during the all those lows of last year, for example, or year and a half ish, the reason why it was very low is because I had no, like, it's essentially like I had no purpose. Like I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't, because
Mm-hmm.
I questioned it ever. So all those questioning, like all the questioning that I technically should have done during the growing up process, like the school and like all these potential these activities, for example, of like what do you want to do in life, or what do you actually like to do. I had always responded to those tests and everything, but with the answers that were given to me by my family, my other people that surround me, like, you're a musician, therefore clearly you want to study music, or piano specifically in this case. But turns out that wasn't it wasn't enough. Like I had to. It felt like I was a third party of like an observer of my own story in a way. Like I didn't feel like I was the one doing things in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And as I explained also in our meeting this morning, it's whenever like I started really questioning like me generally, just trying to understand myself through understanding others, that I started to actually know for real, not just know by because people told me, but know by my own observations, which is I think the most believable form of data point you can use in your like questioning or reflections,
Mm-hmm.
is like when you can observe it yourself. So,
Yeah. What an interesting journey you've been on.
and I pointed out this another quick little fact to my mom earlier, after discussing a little bit about our previous conversation. If, for example, I was to be me in 2020, so 4 years ago, while I was like, I had failed college the second time and everything. If I were to listen to myself nowadays talk about this, I wouldn't believe it. Not like without, like, for example, if I was a different person in a way, right? If I was like seeking someone to relate to, I wouldn't think of myself right now relatable in a way,
Okay.
because it's like it's such a unique like path in a way, yes, but most importantly, back then I wasn't receptive to it. So even though like right now I'm very outgoing and I try to share like my story and I try to listen to other people's stories, um, that didn't used to be the case at all. Before I would try, I mean, I had like everyone, like at first, like I would try to look for the easy answer or tend to brush over it. But point is, if I were to listen to my own video, if this turns into a video at some point,
It
if I were
will.
to listen to my own video back then, I would probably not connect to it that much in a way. I would feel like it's a unreachable destination.
Wow. So let's talk about that journey. One of the things that I focus on a lot, one of the what I think of as a cultural imperative for a learning space is the imperative of belonging, cultures of belonging, where people are supported by people who appreciate them, who appreciate their brilliance,
Mhm.
and and that is for me a very tangible way of creating healthy organizations. How important has support of family and friends been in your journey?
Oh, incredibly important to me. I'm very lucky to have like the family that I have, like primarily, especially considering my mom kind of works in the field, so that
Mhm,
helps as well. I know I got lucky with that, and I know it's not the case all the time.
mhm,
But the feedback you should like part of my growth recently in the recent months, and it's still very recent because it's only been like what 3 months or four maybe, and like I'm um a lot of the feedback I got was usually when it's kind of indirect feedback. It's not people telling me, "Oh, you look like you're doing better," or especially
mhm.
considering that like this is my fourth time going back to posting under studies, and it's like with new people, so like they don't know about all of this. They know me as a new student, a new person, right? So expect if I were to expect feedback from these people in that sense, wouldn't find much. The feedback I get from like listening to people is usually not directly from them in a way. I just feel good by like just understanding others, and through that understanding myself explains the past, and that's the positive feedback that I value the most currently.
Ah,
Because like I'll have these realizations of like just a random memory pops up of like something happening that had no meaning prior, and then I'm like, oh, that explains everything. And or not necessarily to that extent, it might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm like, oh, maybe this could be explained by this, or maybe that could explain this. I'm just making new connections
yeah.
everywhere in like many spheres of my life, and it's those connections, it's the progress in those connections that is the positive feedback in the end. But the only way I'm able to get it is through interacting with friends and family. Family was there specifically more during the trying times as well,
Mhm.
where I was more unstable, needed more direct help in a way. That can be either emotionally, like have important talks, or it can be like potentially like even financially, or any other type of support that can directly help. That was important. But ultimately, what really changed everything in my way of thinking and everything is the feedback that I got from interacting with people, just like friends. So yes, very important, very important.
So I'd like to end with a couple of questions. Let's imagine you're the advisor in chief to the school system. Um, what advice, because I believe we have to fundamentally reimagine how learning cultures are manifested,
Mm-hmm.
how learning is experienced, and how it's, I'll use the word delivered. It's probably not the right word. Um, very much at the moment, it's driven by an exteriorly a curriculum which is designed from who knows where and foisted upon kids and very often it's irrelevant to them. If you had to reimagine how learning took place, what it looked like, what it was experienced like, what it felt like, what are some of the couple of things that you might suggest into the future?
Well, there's definitely like a few aspects that I kind of want to point out. Um, I think the two most important things to me is allowing students to use their strengths, because I understand the necessity of making a system that appeals to most. That is just simply like it's a valid need, because we need to, well, society in general needs to function to appeal to the majority. It doesn't, it makes sense. Although I find it very ironic that in this limitation, in a way, of like appealing to the majority, we tend to exclude people, like ways to adapt for people. So because we try to appeal to the majority, we make this, like, curriculum, or like this very like this main branch, this main, like, the main branch of like of the studies, where most people fit into, and the people who are outside of that struggle. But by allowing those people who don't fit as well to have adaptations, like for example, I can have a computer, because for me it speeds up the process by tenfold, and therefore I can give what you want in the end, which will be my second point, much more efficiently. It allow, like, by including these people, not only you appeal to more people in the end. So there's no really reason to not want to do this. In a way, it's like you just, more people in the end will be able to complete what you ask of them, which is my second point. For the entirety of the first 22 years of my life, especially during studying, and now I'm 23, just for context again, I never really understood. I understood what was asked of me, but not the reason. And I understand that this is something that cannot necessarily be communicated very early. But the fact that still today, for like this happened 2 weeks ago, I had an exam in French literature where I got 100% on the ideas on the analysis of the ideas that the author was trying to convey. And ironically, it's weird to think that somebody who uses logic and who doesn't like interpretation and everything, like me being autistic and all, gets 100% on the idea part. It doesn't seem to make sense. But the reason why that did happen is because I had the time to do it. The teacher was allowing it essentially as much time as you wanted. Most students did it in 1 hour to 2 hours. I took the entire 2 hours that I had that morning from 8:30 to 10:30. Then I went to the library up until 2:30 p.m. to continue everything. And then I worked on it a little bit at night when I came back as well. I ended up spending 6 to 7 hours on the work I did, because I felt like doing a good job. Like I wanted my work to be good. And maybe that's me being more of a perfectionist, which definitely is a factor. But at the same time, I was allowed that time and got the result of 100%, which is great. But now I went to the teacher and brought up the concern that on the final exam, I'm not going to be allowed, 7 hours to do an exam. And the question I asked her was not, can I get more time? Was, why is time important in this case? And I'm sure there is an answer. I'm sure there is, but she was not able to explain it to me,
I
clearly demonstrating that she didn't know either.
I actually don't agree with you. I don't think there is an answer, but that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, but the point where I was going with this is the fact that knowing, like truly understanding the criteria of what is being evaluated is really important to me now.
Mm.
because that's why I do my work. I no longer do my work because I'm told to, because I've learned that that doesn't work from the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Clearly, like I failed post-secondary studies 3 times. Like I dropped out 3 times. So that didn't work. But now that I understand the assignment and I'm like, okay, this is why you need to do this. And most of the time they can't explain like the actual work, why it's important, and I agree with it, then I do it and I get 95, 100% on all my work. But the like sometimes I realize that when I question the purpose of something a little bit, and obviously this is like when I question something that's so much greater than me as an individual, because it's criteria of like the entire province and whatnot. um, but most importantly, when the teacher doesn't understand it either, um, it's very hard to motivate in that case. And that's where I started to like get worried and struggle, because I'm being penalized in my work that could be very good, because I can't write fast by hand, for example. I can't transcribe as fast as other people. Or whenever I transcribe from my computer to a written format, which
Yeah.
I, once again, is another subject that I don't understand why, but
Mhm.
that's another subject. For me, that is just another step of friction that can create mistakes, and very like mild mistakes, but still, like I get impacted overall, and I can't justify it, or
Gotcha.
I don't know why at this point in time. Somebody may prove me wrong, and if they do prove me wrong and say this is why we absolutely need this class to be time sensitive, and it makes sense, sure, I'll understand and I'll adapt to that. But I don't want to conform to something just because I'm told to. In a way, I want to understand why I'm doing things.
And therein lies one of the major issues in the traditional school system. But
Mhm.
that's perhaps for another interview, when we will have a debate rather than a one-way
Yeah.
interview. Final question. There are millions of Émiles coming up through this world, uh,
Mhm.
struggling to make sense of themselves, struggling to make sense of the world around them. And all of this in a context where it's difficult within the schools, it's difficult for families, it's painful for families to watch this happen and to be a part of it. What advice would you have, Émile, for young people, maybe in their early adolescent years, who are trying to make sense of all of this? Young people and their families, what advice would you have?
Um, Usually when I tell my story, I explain very clearly the steps I went through and like exactly what I did, which for me was I've reiterated many times that it was figuring out myself through others, right? By analyzing thought processes and understanding how people view the well, reality through their eyes. Um, but that's not how I wouldn't want anyone to do that.
Okay.
And what I mean by this is that that is my strength
Yes.
specifically, my strength, and it was backed up, that, which was also a major helping factor. It was backed up by my diagnosis that I got
Mhm.
with the metacognition score that I got. Analyzing thought process is the thing I do the best and the most efficiently, and it's the easiest thing for me. So very little friction, a very little challenge, and a lot of reward and feedback from it. So that was my strength. So like, and I've used that to understand many things. And so essentially focusing on the strength and like just like really using the strength to its full capacity, which I think is two different things. If you focus on your strength, that implies a little bit that you ignore your weaknesses. But if you make full usage of your strengths, it's a very different perspective, because you just use the tools that you have. And I think like any person trying to find like either find themselves or that's struggling with XY issue of any kind should use the tools that they have to their full extent, because that's the best way to solve a problem, is to use every tool that you can to their full extent without ignoring potential flaws or weaknesses that you have.
Let's say I'm going to be a teacher next year, I'm going to be teaching grade 8, and you happen to know of a young boy or a young girl who's coming into my classroom with similar sort of um, a similar sort of a diagnosis to you. What advice would you have to me as the upcoming teacher in terms of how to set the space and how to set the environment with that young person?
Immediately when asked a question about environment, usually the first image we get portrayed is the classroom itself, which is
Yes.
not a bad answer. But environment can also be, more meta a little bit than this. Like you can set expectations with the entire class, like the social environment, for example. If other students are aware that some students in the class are different, just and if like it is portrayed in a way like if the teacher explains it in a way that is, it doesn't feel like you're talking about somebody who's handicapped. Like, it's just considering by observation that
Mhm.
some people have different needs. It on a very neutral basis. If other student, if like everybody understands that, then already there won't be as much of a need for camouflage or like a need to hide things, which is once again going back to the like not ignoring the weaknesses part that I just mentioned. So in terms of environment, uh, I think the actual I see a lot of changes recently in schools. I've worked partly a little bit in primary schools during COVID as one of the many things I did for self exploration, and I've seen many physical changes, stools for ADHD students where they can bounce around and everything, and those are all great changes. But in terms of actual understanding, and maybe it was a bit young for the age that I was actually coaching or whatever, but in terms of actual understanding, there wasn't as much progress. I feel like a lot of it was very superficial, in that like in the way that students understood each other. So yeah, that if the teacher could do anything is like for the environment, and once again, I'm not a professional, so I don't really know how to approach this, but um, make like if we could reach a point where there is an awareness in the class of this situation, and therefore we can adapt and understand the adaptation, like why it's necessary, then I think that would a lot of people that may relate to me, for example, might feel a lot more included and not feel like the alien for once.
And oh, that's a powerful statement. Oh, okay. But and you know what? I think that what works for kids with any form of diagnosis works for kids with no diagnosis. It's a culture of understanding and decency where just decent interactions and decent behaviors become the norm of the day, and anything else is actually unacceptable. Émile, wow,
Oh yeah,
fascinating.
this is specifically applying to neurotypical versus, not
Hmm.
to oppose them, but you know what I mean. It's like
Absolutely,
neurotypical and neuroatypical people, but this can be applied to any sort of difference. It
absolutely.
can be religion, religious. It can be skin color, because we know it's still
Hmm.
a fairly taboo subject, but it still
Yeah.
happens. It can be really anything, just story the like just some more family related aspects. It's like all these things that make us unique are being left out, or like are being ignored to
Yeah.
focus on what everybody has in common. But once you struggle to identify to that main branch of normalness, that's where the problem happens. That's where you feel left out. That's where you struggle to understand yourself.
And that's what we need to work on. Émile, thank you very much indeed again. And I got a funny feeling we're going to be having quite a few of these conversations into the future.
I hope so.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Émile.
You're welcome.